Good evening. Tonight we are looking at the moon. Welcome to the final episode in this series of Look Up in the Sky. Now, the eagle-eyed viewers among you may notice something different about me. Yeah, that's right, I've had a shave. Was getting a bit scruffy. Now, tonight's topic was one of the late great Sir Patrick Moore's favourites, our moon. The moon is our constant companion. Now, although it's quite a bit smaller than the Earth, it's only 250,000 miles away, which might sound like a lot, but in cosmic terms that's nothing at all. As a result, we can see a lot of detail on its surface. Even with the naked eye, you can make out the maria, which are these darkest spots, otherwise known as the seas, and with a telescope you can see a great number of the craters. Now, the moon is in a crescent phase at the moment, so let's go outside with the telescope and see what we can see. Tonight the moon is just 3 days old. That means it's the third day since new moon, when the moon and the sun, from our perspective, were in line with each other. As a result, it's a very, very thin crescent, and we're going to try and image that crescent using the same camera I used for Venus, but a different filter. The Venus filter was looking at the near ultraviolet. This time we're looking at the opposite end of the spectrum, the near infrared. The reason we use near infrared filters for looking at the moon... There's a couple of reasons why we use near-infrared filters when looking at the moon. One of them is particularly important right now when we're looking at it in the crescent phase, because the sky is not dark. As you can see, the sky behind me is still quite bright. So I'm trying to image a white moon against a bright blue sky. And that's quite tricky. But the near-infrared filter, that blocks a lot of that blue of the sky and brings out the contrast of the moon, so we can see it more clearly. The other reason we use this filter is to do with our atmosphere. If you remember from episode 1, I was talking about how our atmosphere acts a bit like a heat haze, so when you're really zooming in on something, it kind of shimmers and wibbles, and that's terrifically annoying. Well, the truth is, our atmosphere has a greater and lesser effect on different wavelengths. So the blue end of the spectrum is affected the most, and the red end the least. So by imaging in the near-infrared, we end up with slightly more stable seeing. By minimising the effects of our atmosphere, one can obtain fantastic close-ups like these. Compared to Venus, the moon appears really big. That's just because it's so much closer to us. It appears so big, in fact, that I can't fit it all on the sensor of my camera in one go. So what I have to do is take several panes, like a collage, and connect them together in the computer later on. So let's see what the laptop's getting now. I am using the same program I used to capture the Venus data. All I've done is to adjust the shutter speed and contrast settings accordingly for the moon. Okay, so I've got my frames now. Next step is processing. To begin with, I process each pane of the mosaic individually in Registacks. Once each pane has been processed, I assemble them in Photoshop, and once assembled, there is a small amount of post-processing to do, in particular adjusting the contrast of each pane so the background sky appears completely dark. Then that's it, and here's our finished mosaic. You can see that although we have created an image of the complete crescent, the resolution is still pretty high as we zoom in. Now, you may have noticed that the moon always seems to show the same face to us. It's a three-dimensional sphere, but we only ever see the same side of it. Now, that's because the moon takes about 27 days to spin once on its axis. It also takes about 27 days to orbit once all the way around the Earth. So as it's moving around the Earth, it is constantly turning so that it keeps the same face pointed at us. Now, that's not a coincidence. That's to do with the tides. Now, you know that the moon raises tides on the Earth. Well, the Earth also raises tides on the moon. Now, there's no water on the moon, but those tidal forces, they still exist. So what's happened is that the Earth's tidal forces upon the moon have created what we call like a gravitational friction, and they've slowed the rotation of the moon right down to the point where it is now no longer rotating at all relative to the Earth. So that's why you always see the same side from the Earth. The only way we're able to see the far side of the moon is to send spacecrafts out there to photograph it. Where am I going from there? Oh, no, let's pause for a sec. Now, something else you'll have noticed is what we call Earthshine. That bright part, that bright crescent, that's where the sun is hitting the moon directly and bouncing to us. But what about the rest of the moon? We can still see quite a bit of that. Well, that's Earthshine. That is where the sun is hitting the Earth, it's bouncing off the Earth onto the moon, then back from the moon to us. Remember that the moon has no luminosity of its own, it's not shining at all. So that is sunlight that has hit the Earth, bounced off the Earth onto the moon, and then off the moon again back to us. So there we are. That's it for this episode and this series. So for one last time, good night. Audience participation show with a bit of after my first episode, some of you I'm going to be able to keep it in longer than this.